Já está a gravar. Então vamos esperar mais 2 minutinhos, 3. Entretanto, se quiser ir ao Moodle, continuando, se tiverem alguma dúvida enquanto a aula não começa, estejam à vontade.
Já agora aproveito para tirar uma dúvida relativamente ao Heroku. Há alguma forma de poder fazer o debug do código? Porque fazemos o deploy do código, depois temos de verificar se a aplicação correu ou não, e se não correr, ficamos aqui no meio sem saber qual é que foi o erro que aconteceu, e fazer o debug não é fácil.
Não. Existe, por acaso, eu não sei se tenho neste computador, mas é preciso instalar o software. Não tenho neste computador. É preciso instalar o software deles, que é o Heroku Git, uma coisa assim. E depois, eu vou partilhar aqui o ecrã. Pois é, ele instala na linha de comandos. Instala na linha de comandos, não. Ele instala no computador e acessa através da linha de comandos. E para ver o debug da aplicação é Heroku, porque instala com este comando. É assim que se acede. Depois é logs, app, e depois é o nome da aplicação que deu no Heroku. Por exemplo, o DataVis. Ele depois faz print aqui, eu não tenho o Heroku instalado aqui, ele depois faz print na linha de comandos dos erros ou não erros da aplicação.
Ok, diz a linha do código em que teve erro, como se estivéssemos no Jupyter.
Exatamente, como se estivéssemos no Jupyter.
Ok.
Isto por acaso é bastante avançado, isto até diz quem é que acedeu à aplicação e tudo, acho que até dá IPs, que é um bocado estranho, mas é um site normal. Mas é assim.
Ok. Ok, obrigado.
Não. Ele não tem erro. Ok, já estamos mais ou menos em cima da hora. Quer dizer, já estamos em cima da hora. Vamos começar agora a aula. Eu vou começar a falar inglês e... So, for those of you that have come in the meanwhile, please go to Moodle and download today's notebook. So, I'm going to share with you my screen. So, so if you come here, well, you probably have already arrived here since you joined Zoom naturally. Simply download the folder. I believe it's zipped as in any download in Moodle. After that, you go to your project in PyCharm. You should already have a project from last class called lesson 5. So you don't have lesson 6 naturally. What you can do to make it easier is right-click the folder lesson 5 and click show in Explorer, which will open the place where the files are, and you can simply drag to this place the classes files. So after you do that, it will appear here. And since we already have set up the interpreter, etc., it should be much easier. So I believe, do you all have a project from last class already made?
If we don't, it's just open the new one, or
if you don't have a project.
Yeah, from last class. I'm not sure if I made it until the end.
Oh, it was in the beginning, but Well, if you're not finding, you can open recent if it's in the same computer. Yes, and it should appear the name of the project that you gave. But if you don't have a project, you can just new project, call it whatever. Here, existing interpreter, and choose the Jupyter, the Anaconda interpreter that you've created for the classes, because this is the engine that has Python, Plotly, Dash, etc. installed. If it doesn't appear immediately here, you can always click on the three dots. It will open this window, Conda environment, and here it should appear your interpreter. So I already have it here, so it doesn't appear here. After you do that, you simply create an environment. It will be empty naturally, so it will only be like this. You can do the same thing, show in Explorer, go into your project and drag the files from this class. So yeah. So did everyone manage to get to this part? Okay, I'll give you some time. In the meanwhile, while you're doing this, putting it in your in PyCharm, etc., how are the projects going? So I've noticed that only 3 groups, it's not required naturally, but only 3 groups have put their schedule for the assistants. So I really want you all to do the project because it's a requirement, right? And please, if you have doubts, send me an email, etc., so that we can all do the project and have good grades naturally. So also, as I said before, I've sent an email to all of you with some examples from last semester, some projects. So keep in mind that the last semester class was from a master's that had a lot of Python programming, etc. So the expected level of work of projects is different from this class. So they had previously an introduction to Python lecture, etc. So naturally they were better prepared than you, because in the beginning you told me that only like 3 or 4 people knew Python. So do not get scared if the projects seem too much. Also, while we're installing, you can already talk about what we're going to do this class. So we have only 2 files this class with another auxiliary files. Today we're finally going to get into the final part and the most important part when creating a dashboard, which is the layout. So some of you already asked me, how do we put things in places? Today will be the class where we're going to do that. So yeah.
Sorry, teacher. What did you do after the search Explorer to open the files? Sorry.
Which part?
You went to Search Explorer,
Oh, okay.
then
Here.
okay.
It should appear here after a bit.
Okay, thanks.
If it doesn't appear, it's a more troublesome issue, but it's also solvable. Okay, did everyone manage to do this?
Yes.
Awesome. So this class will be a bit more practical than the last ones. I'll first give you an example, and after that I am going to ask you to do it in a different application, but to actually manage the layout of an application. And we can already run the first example. Oh, mine is already running. So actually need to change screens. Let's do it like this. So if you run the application, it should look something like this. What we want to do with this application in particular is change the layout of these two interactive components, this Dropbox and these radio items, to be on the left of the visualization. So we actually get something like this. So we want the components here and the visualization here. The last bar will stay here. So it will stay in the same position, but with different things on top. And as you might imagine, this is the beginning of an application. So every application starts with someone envisioning where the things will go. And as you can see, it's done with containers. I don't know if you remember from last class, I told you that at least the most useful HTML object there was the HTML.div, which is basically an empty container. And what we can do with these containers, since they're HTML objects, is manipulate them in order to put them wherever or however we want. So they can carry out styling properties. And it's very easy to associate a container, a particular container, to some given styling options. And position is also a styling option. So let's clear this out. And before we actually go into this, so you can have a feel for what styling options there are, I actually found this page. You can, if you can, please go to this link, which actually is here. So in class 6 app, it's the same link. And here, don't be scared, is an interactive dashboard where you can actually choose the properties that you want, and it will print out the code that will actually enforce those properties on your objects. So go to this link. You should get here. And as you might imagine, with the internet, there's a lot of styling properties. There are selectors. Here's our div, which is the main container. And if you go here, for example, this is kind of confusing, but once you understand it, it's pretty useful. For example, background. If you want your container or whatever to have a given background, you simply choose whatever properties you want. So this is the preview. So for example, I want this image to be in this position. No need to repeat. And the color of the container can be more or less defined. So this is actually transparency. After you choose your properties, you can simply copy this code and put it, we'll see later. So if you're searching for possible ways to style your application without going into internet, going through code, this is kind of an easier way out, so you can see something and actually get the code immediately. So this was kind of a bad example, but for example, this box shadow, if you have a container or a box and you want to apply some shadow to it, you can actually choose how to put it. So the shadow is this thing. Let's put a different color so it's more obvious. As you know, there are a lot of properties. Imagine you want your container to have this type of shadow. You would simply come here and copy this code. So box shadow, 24 pixels, -6. And if you have doubts on what do these numbers mean, there's also a very useful site called HTML W3 School. So CSS doubts. Sorry, shadow box. So whenever you have issues with some CSS, which we'll go through later, item, CSS is for the styling properties. The go-to site to learn things, so there's a lot of things, is the W3 schools. And if you come here, it's very straightforward. It will probably be the first link that appears when you're searching. So before teaching, I'm trying to give you the tools so when you don't know, you know where to find things. So we already have two sites. This dashboard might be useful for you, might not. But when you don't know how to really style, nitpick your containers, properties, etc., this might be useful. And if you want to learn more about some particular properties, etc., you can always go to this site, which probably will be your first hit when you're searching for some particular CSS item. So, but moving on, you have the links in the document. So we actually have already an application made. So it's a very small application, but it already has callbacks and it already has interactive components, sorry, as you can see here. And now we want to change it in order for it to make more sense to us. So although this is small and it's very understandable this way, but if we had more items or if we had some real necessity of styling differently, well, we would need to learn how to do it, right? So there are two main ways to do it, and it's through classes or styling. So if you go through the code, hope you remember, we had the data, which we would get from somewhere. Here we are using the same old data set that we always use, which is the emissions data set. Here we've defined the arrays that will go into our interactive components. Remember that we had, for example, a country components, which had this particular input style. So it's a list of dictionaries. We had our guess dropdown as well, which also was a list of dictionaries, and the sectors, which was also a list of dictionaries. So actually, I should be in example one, which is more simple. So I'm sorry, this was I was already into the next example. So this was the example 4 from last class. Do you all remember the last class's example 4? I know it's been a while, but do you still remember callbacks and the dash initial framework before I go into the styling?
More or less. The callback concept was not so clear. If you could review it.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Oh, good. Thank God we started with that. So this was example 4. This is a copy paste now. So this is the output. I don't know if you remember from last class, and this was the code for it, naturally. So until now, we already know how to acquire a data set. We went through the interactive components. So actually, I will show to you again. So lesson 5, we had this dash core components example, which were basically a list of components, of major interactive components from dash that you could simply copy and paste and appropriate to your code. So if you run this, we had a list of components, interactive components. And an interactive component was a necessity for a callback. So a callback is a connection between an interactive component and a figure or another otherwise static object. So, and whenever you change or interact with a component, the callback is triggered or activated, so to speak, and it will use the information in the callback to actually build or change the other component. And the callback is simply the connection between them two. And it's also saying, oh, whenever you change this, you will also change the connected component.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So actually, this is only when debug mode is on. If you click in this button, it will actually, this doesn't have callbacks, this example. It will actually show you the callbacks. So if we go back to the other application, that, remember, always close your applications. So if we go to this initial example, it's always in the same link. So it sometimes takes a while to load. And if you go to an application that actually has callbacks and is on debug mode is simply debug equal to true when you run the server or the application. Nonetheless, if it is on debug mode and it has callbacks, if you click here, it will actually show you the connections between components and the graph in this case. So here we have three components: country drop, which is this one; guest radio, which is this one; and year slide, which is this one. Naturally, they are connected by a callback, this green dot, and that callback goes into this graph example. We connect them because we've defined IDs for each component. That's how the app knows where to go, where to get the information from. And if we go here to the application, you'll surely notice that the components themselves have IDs, and the name of the ID is what's shown there. So you actually need to tell the program where to get the information from. That's why we've defined IDs for each component. So any doubts with the callbacks themselves? So I know it has a particular structure, but the intuition behind the callback.
For me, it's clear now. Thank you.
So the intuition is the most important stuff, because the structure is always the same. A callback is defined by @app.callback, is always the same thing. It is enclosed by outputs and inputs, can be multiple outputs, as we've seen in the previous class. This one only has one output but receives 3 inputs. It's this structure. So the input takes 2 values: the ID of the input interactive object and the type of input. So it's either a value, a figure, it can be an integer, it can be a link. It has a limited amount of types, but the most common ones, and probably the ones that you're going to use in your project, are either output a figure or input a value. It can also output a value, which actually it's in this example. But nonetheless, after that, the function that you defined immediately after is immediately associated with that callback. So the name of the function and whatever you use for these variables are completely independent to whether or not it's a callback. So this is simply positional. It's its structure, and it is how it is. So the function that you define immediately below after you call a callback is the function that's associated with that callback. So whenever this input or one of these inputs changes, it will run this function with these 3 inputs, and the output of this function will go to this place here, to the graph.example, which is simply a blank container that only accepts plotly figures. That's the dcc.graph. And this is a simple Python function that builds a scatter plot with plot.
So that function that is directly next to the callback, must have exactly the same number of, so those arguments have to be the same as the inputs in the callback and the output also 1 1, right?
Yes, same number and same order. So whatever you call here
Okay,
doesn't make
okay.
any difference, because this will have
It's the order then.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's basically it. You can have multiple callbacks. If I wanted, I could define a new callback exactly the same below, and you can have multiple outputs as well. You can have multiple everything, but this is it's a simple enough callback, which doesn't need to be more difficult actually. So actually, from the example before, there's a small difference. I don't know if you remember, but in the example before, we didn't have drop-down country radio gas. We actually had this inside of the layout of the application. I've only changed the place where they are because it's easier to read the structure of an application this way versus having all of these actually four interactive components inside of the layout. It's the same thing. We only have an intermediate variable so that this is less crowded. But moving on. If we come here to the Dash example, I will do the boxes again. So just to showcase what we need. So remember, boxes carry styling properties. So we actually need to associate each component to a particular box. So first of all, let's define how many boxes we'll need. So we'll have a box here where we'll have inside of that box. I'm saying box, but it's actually html.div, but I believe box is easier to understand. We'll have a box that will have these two components inside. Another box that will have this graph, this graph inside. And we can have another box. It wouldn't be necessary, but let's use another box to put this slider inside. So here we need 1, 2, 3 boxes. And we actually could have another box for the title, which would make sense, but let's not do it for now. So before we start actually doing any styling, passing on any styling properties, we need to have boxes. So let's clear all drawings. Okay. So remember, a box is a html.div object. So we want the drop-down country and the radio gas inside of the same box. Remember, this html.br is a break which better separates items. So it doesn't, visually doesn't, we don't see anything. They simply have a bigger gap between them. So we can keep them so they are not so stick together inside of the box. So here we will have html.div, open parentheses, open straight brackets. And inside of it will be these three components. And let's close brackets. So this is our first box. Our second box will only have one item, which is the dcc.graph. So we copy and we close it. This is not well. Don't forget the commas or too many commas because it will print out a mistake probably. And now we will put another box, which is kind of unnecessary for the year slider. So we don't need the break anymore here. html.div. And so here it is. We have 1, 2, 3 boxes. And if we actually don't need to rerun the app since it is on debug mode and it's still running, if you alter the code, it will automatically change the app without you needing to change the redeploy the app itself. So, but if you come here, you actually won't see any difference. So it has already updated because they are simply boxes. They do not carry, they do not have by default any styling property. So this is as simple as it gets. We simply predefine the structure that we want to give it. And the boxes or the html.div objects are the way to pass those properties. So now that we already have our boxes defined, we have to pass styling properties to it. We have two possible ways to do it. Either through a CSS, which is a file that has associates to each class some given properties. CSS is also a programming, it's not really a programming language, but it's a language by itself. It's similar to Python, so don't worry. Or we can simply pass them directly inside of Dash. So you have these two options. Both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Naturally, the most common one is the CSS option. So since Dash is not that well known, CSS is known throughout the internet. The first option that we'll go through is the Dash option because it's immediately here and it associates immediately to a particular object some styling properties. And you can do it to basically every object. So what we want now is associate to this first. Oh, we actually forgot one box. So if you come here, remember, we had one box here, one box here, and one box here. And normally, as you can see, items are displayed vertically. So they are stacked vertically. So if you define an item below one, if you define an item after an item, you will put it below. What you need is a special place or a box where the items are no longer stacked horizontally, but vertically. And in order to do it, that item will be a box. So as you might imagine, you need another box here where the properties of this box are, okay, all items inside of this box, instead of being displayed vertically, are displayed horizontally. So I almost forgot that box. So what we need, oh, okay. So what we still need to do is come here. So these are the two boxes. I've used the tab so we can already separate them and put both of them inside of another box. Yes, and don't worry, an application or any web page has a lot of HTML div elements. So, and this is actually a pretty simple one. So don't forget the comma. So here it is. We have the title, that middle box, which has two smaller boxes, where one of them has the two components and the other has the graph, and another box for the year slider. So this one only has the year slider, so it's kind of unnecessary, but for now, let's keep it. This one has two boxes that will be stacked horizontally instead of vertically. And inside of this one, there are two interactive elements. They have a break, so they are not so stacked together, but okay. And here we have a graph. So the first question that you might have, okay, so this big box tells the smaller boxes to be stacked horizontally. but it does not, the property to be stacked horizontally does not pass to its children. So the objects inside of the inner box will not have the stacked horizontally property. We would need to define it as well if we wanted to. So this will not be stacked horizontally. It will be vertically as it is standard. So did everyone, is there any question?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
Awesome. So this if you go through it the first time and you see a lot of code, it might be a bit scary, but it's actually somewhat simple. So now we are going to pass the first way. There are two ways to pass properties. We'll go through the first one, which is the dash, the particular to dash, and it is particular to every component. So as we'll see after this, you can actually set global properties and associate to a set of boxes or HTML components. With this method, you can only associate one set of properties to one object. So you already see one limitation, but it's easier to use. So it is your choice. To input styling properties inside of Dash to a particular object, you just come here. So a div has its children or its inner components, which are inside of an array, and it also accepts one property called style. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And the style is a Python dictionary, which is defined, a Python dictionary is defined by these curly brackets that accepts as key styling properties and as value the styling options. So we actually don't want to start with this box. We'll start by setting the display as horizontal and not vertical. So we need to put the style in this particular box, so the bigger one. Okay. And the property is called display. And the value is not horizontal. I actually believe there's an horizontal possibility, but one of the most used ones to set the display of children items or objects as horizontal and not vertical is flex. So this is just display equals to flex. And if you come to the app, if you go to the app itself, as you can see, okay, the items inside of this box now are stacked horizontally instead of vertically. So this one. Oh, sorry. The box is bigger, so this box. But these two components are, even though they are inside of that bigger box, they're like second generation, they do not share the properties. So this box or HTML div does not share the same properties as its parent. So keep that in mind. This one still has its display to box or normal. And as you can see, the sizes of these smaller or children HTML containers are not optimal. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put this as, let's say in terms of width, 20% of this bigger box, and this has 80%, right? So it gives out all of the box. So let's do that. So this one is the box that has, or HTML div that has the two interactive components. This will have, one of the properties is width. I type it wrong. I believe this is well written. I don't know. And we'll set it to 20%. It's always, they are always strings, even though they are numbers, 20% or 0.2, but this should always be a string. And let's set the other to 80%. And in terms of size, the HTML, this graph should actually stretch to fit this 80%. So let's see. Yeah, so here it is. So we now have, let me just do the box again. This big box here, this one here, and this one here. So, and this empty space, it's actually bothersome, but this is from the Plotly figure. So every Plotly figure has a margin. I don't know if you remember from the layout, you could change the margin, and it has a big margin. So it is actually stretched out, I believe, but we would have to reduce the margin of the Plotly object itself, or Plotly figure itself, and not the container that's enclosing the figure. So yeah. So this is from the Plotly figure. You would have to reduce its margin. Because remember, Plotly figures can have titles. This one doesn't have a title, but so now you can basically put whatever objects wherever you want, right? Okay. So now let's do the same thing, but with the CSS method. So it is harder to learn, but it is more, it's not more, yeah, it has more uses, and it's more generalized in terms of learning. So as you can clearly see with this method, the style needs to be directly as, yes, you can change the box color. And okay, we can.
Professor.
Yeah.
Can we also change the bullets that
the what? Sorry.
The bullets. The boxes that you select on the graph.
These bullets.
Yes.
For the
put
color?
them like vertical.
Oh.
Because that is one only one variable, let's say.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Yes. It's called radio. That's probably one property of the dashcore component itself. It's radio item.
Okay.
So, but going. So here it's stacked.
Radio is what I was calling bullets, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's. So the bullets are the radio gas. It's a radio items, ID radio value.
Oh, so you would change the variable in the radio. Okay, I get it.
No,
I actually here, and it would present differently. You haven't, but
I actually don't know if it's that way you're saying. I'm seeing it. So.
Okay.
So here actually it's the same thing as me, but theirs is stacked vertically, and here is stacked horizontally.
Maybe it's the side of the box.
Oh, it's here. So by default it should be like this. It's maybe the size of the box, yes. But display inline block.
And you don't have that on your
No,
code?
I don't. I have exactly like this, but with different options and different values.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is a particularity of the, but let's try to do it. So
Okay.
there's an option called label style, which goes in here. And actually the display is the same type of display that we've set for the, this is also a CSS option apparently. So inline block should put as it shouldn't change a thing, right? So yeah, correct.
Yes.
So if we would force the size, as your colleague said, to be smaller, so imagine it was 20%, it would probably start to stack vertically.
Okay.
I would like to see if you could, independently of the size of the outer container, stack it vertically. So display inline block. Let's put display as block. I believe it's like this. Yeah, okay, yeah. So display equal to block is the standard vertical display. So actually what we did here is change the display from block to flex, which is similar to the inline block somewhat, but from vertical block is vertical.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Okay.
Regarding the colors of the box, can we change it?
Yes. So remember, we had a site which could help us out, which is the so I'm saying help us out because there's a lot of possible changes and a lot of different properties, so it's not easy. But for example, here it is, this color picker, color,
Okay.
background color. All of the colors need to be in X color code. So if you want a particular color code, you just put yellow X code. And there are a lot of sites.
Okay. And the text font is on the box too?
Yes, you can define a text font for a particular box or for the whole document, but
yeah, it's easier.
Yeah, so that can't be done. It can actually be done here, but it's easier to do it in CSS because every web page has a web page is a big HTML.div. So it's a big container.
Okay.
And that container is actually called body. And you can associate CSS stylings or styling properties to the body itself, which rules every other thing that's inside of it in terms of fonts, etc. So yes, you can do it, and we'll show you how to do it the other way around. So it's easier to do it with the CSS method. But box color, right? So let's say we would want the color of the box, the interactive components box, to be yellow. So that we are in the wrong place. Okay, that box is actually here. So it was the one that had a width of 20%. And you can actually set its background color. I believe that was the name of the property. Yeah. Okay. To yellow. So Just need to put the commas right. And background color, if I spell it right, yeah. So now this particular container should be yellow. So sometimes takes a while to load. Oh, since I took too long to correct my mistake, which I mistyped, it actually went down. Yeah, but here it is.
Okay.
So, and there's a whole lot more properties because this looks kind of ugly naturally. But we'll go through an easier way to find better properties.
Okay. Thanks.
One question, Professor.
Yeah, sure.
In the project evaluation, is there any percentage for this CCS implementation?
No.
CSS, sorry.
No.
I mean, we are looking at a visualization, but also to HTML and CSS. So,
please finish, sorry.
Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah, actually, we don't grade the code that much. We actually grade the quality of the visualization itself and not the complexity of the code.
Okay.
So don't worry.
But how do you do that without the code? I'm sorry. How can you do a visualization, in whatever language it is, if you don't have the code? I think we are missing the basic steps, because you are evaluating the result, but to get there you need the code. So I'm not sure if the amount of classes we had and the amount of knowledge we have gathered so far is enabling us to pull off all the stunts you want us to pull. I'm sorry, but I don't see it seriously.
Okay, that's a fair point. So you're saying that with the classes that you have, the amount of classes
we have to learn how to code in Python. Now we are learning how to do the layout in CSS and HTML. And you say that you're not grading the code, which we spend 4 classes doing.
Well, you need the code to achieve a good visualization, right? And actually, this is not yet CSS or HTML. We still haven't gotten to the CSS option, but it's a fair point. The thing is, you actually need to know the code, and we are in the basics still to do a visualization. And what separates this from a more complex dashboard in terms of code, it's very little. So if you can do this, then you can do this for a lot of other components because it's the same in terms of code. But what defines the difference in terms of complexity is actually how you can manage and structure visualization. So if you come here to the Dash App Gallery, which is a collection of example applications. Let's say this one. I remember that Professor Pedro Cabral liked this one in particular. In terms of what we've learned, this is not unachievable, right? So we have 2 plotly figures, we have 3 interactive components, and we have some styling. So I know, yeah, it's hard to learn. Actually, Python was a requirement, and it is what it is.
It wasn't actually in the syllabus. It wasn't shown as a requirement.
If that's the case, well, I'm very sorry, and we will change that. Okay. But I believe that with the classes that you had, more in particular, until this class, until now, you can actually do this. Okay, it requires work, and there's a big handicap if you didn't know Python previously. But
so what I mean, and I'm not really getting, is that you are saying that you are only rating the visualization, but not all the code that is put into it. So I'm
okay.
struggling to understand how it will work.
Okay. I said this to try to ease it for you. So my intent with this is, okay, yeah, obviously we'll evaluate the code. So, but what I was trying to say with this is, please do not try to do very complicated things code-wise. Sometimes less is more, and complex coding does not mean a better visualization in the end. So, for example, this code in particular that you're seeing in this example is very straightforward. It's not a very complex code. And there is an example for it, actually. So, and it is still a good visualization. So that is what I was trying to say. I'm sorry if I was misunderstood, if I said it in the not so very comprehensible manner, sorry. But I'm just trying to make it so that you don't worry a lot, because it isn't easy to learn this, I know.
But for instance, regarding the placeholders that you have on this drop down, for instance, we didn't learn that yet. We will learn that, how to put the placeholders, to make new styles for the drop downs, the lines, the borders. That, because it's this kind of stuff that is making more beautiful this dashboard.
Okay, yeah, the styling is, this styling is only, I'm trying to explain. The styling is just, you only need to learn it once, and after that you need to find the particular properties that define whatever you want. So for example, if you want this corner to be round, you just type it on the internet, but the way you do it is always the same way. You simply are looking for that, the name of the property in particular to change.
Okay.
It's like, this is a learning curve, and when you get to the moment where, okay, given a particular property, I know how to put it in my HTML div or whatever component, then it's just a matter of, okay, let's search what the property that I want is. So, and this is what I'm trying to do now is, okay, the way to, if you know the properties, which really depends on what you want, and sometimes it's not easy to find, I know. We'll also go through processes to find whatever properties you might want. But when you have the properties that you want to change, it's particularly easy to implement them. So I hope I've answered. Do you still have any other questions regarding this? Okay, so the thing is, we evaluate the code, okay, but I want to make it so that you don't get very worried with complex code. It doesn't need to be that complex for it to be a good work. So that was the point I was trying to get to. Okay, moving on. Where was I? Okay, so we actually now know how to, given a set of properties that we want to change, to to introduce them in a particular HTML component through the property called style. So style equal to a dictionary, which has property and the value of the property, and can have whatever you want, however many you want. There's also an additional way with CSS, okay, which is not that difficult to implement. It's a learning curve again, which is in your assets folder. So Dash by default, if he sees an assets folder called assets next to the application, he will search that folder for a CSS. A CSS, if you open it, is a document that that gives to certain objects certain properties. So for example, this CSS is telling that the body, which is the main container of a web application, needs to have a background color equal to, this is white. This is also telling that the item box should have these properties. The items H1, H2, H3, which actually, if you remember, are this html.h1, which is the titles container, or the titles string. It's telling that all of these items need to have these properties. So the text aligned to center and the background color to a grayish. And I don't know if you had noticed, but here actually the title is kind of grayish, right? The background of the title. So that's it. And these are properties that are not being used. I simply got them because it's just to showcase you some possible properties that you might want to use. This media is something more advanced that you don't need to use, but if I had time, I was going to talk about it, but it's something you don't need to worry about. So, and you can already see two differences here. So you have items that do not have a dot in the beginning and items that do have a dot. So if it doesn't have a dot, for example, body, h1, h2, etc., it means they are HTML objects. So it is HTML dot something, or the predefined HTML objects that every web page has. If it has a dot in the beginning of the name, that means that this is a class, and classes are defined by the developer and not by the web page itself. So this is defined by you. You need to create a class. How do you create a class? You simply go to any object you want.
Professor.
Yeah.
Can we just get back 1 second?
Oh, sorry.
I'm not. Yeah. I don't have access today on the computer that I'm using. I don't have access to the IDE, so I'm just following the class. I just like to question if the style.css is already available on our IDE. This is already created, or it was something that you created?
No. Until now, the only thing I've changed was the example one, creating containers and associating a style. Okay. You already have a CSS, yes.
And regarding the headers, the H1, H2, H3, H4,
yeah.
Does it matter if I do H1 or H2, or is it the same because it's defined as the same?
The difference between H1 to 6
is the font.
The size, yeah.
Okay.
The size of the text, yeah.
It's implicit. It's not regarded here, right?
Yeah, it's implicit. It is a pre-made HTML object or a container that immediately associates to whatever strings it has inside to a given set of properties.
Okay.
It's only the size property, but it's a set of properties.
So we just define here in the style the properties that we want, and we just put the prefix in the container, the div container, right?
Yeah. And it needs to have a dot. So if it doesn't have a dot, it's because it is an HTML component. If it has a dot, it's a class. And you give a class to something. Let's give to this container here, which has the year slider. Simply by, as you would do with style, with class name. And the class name is a string that contains all of the classes that you want to associate with this particular container. And yes, it can have more than one class in that particular container. So, but for example, let's give it this box class. So it has box shadow, padding, margin, background color, border radius. Let's give to this the box. So, box. It doesn't have a dot in the class name. Okay. And if you come here to the page, the container that had the year slider now has some properties. So as you can see, it is inside of a better looking box, let's call it. So, and the good thing about CSS is that you can pass this property to this class to whatever item you want. If I wanted to have this type of box to my graph and to my to this container, so if I wanted these containers to also have these properties, it would be as simple as giving them that class. So the ones that have width, it's not inside of style. Class name equals to box, and let's give it to the other one as well. Okay. So, and if you come here, there's already an issue here because there are conflicting properties. If you remember, we manually gave this container a yellow background, and the box gives it a grayish black background. So when there is conflict, it chooses the style that was associated specifically with that box. So, but as you can see, it has the rounder margins, it has padding, it has it has these properties, right? Any questions about the class association?
How do you associate more than one class? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sure. So it's simply
I interrupted someone.
Class name space class name. So if I had another class called something else, I would simply do this class 2. They only need to be separated by a space. But let's showcase it. So let's create a class called class 2.
And the style is the same? They only need to be separated by a space, or no?
Yeah.
This is just applicable for the...
They only need to be separated by a space, yes.
Okay.
So let's take one of these border radius, which is easier to see. It's if the borders are in the corners are rounded or not. So if the corners are rounded, still it's because it is getting both of these classes, and it should only be one of them. So as you can, where did I put the class 2? So as you can see, the yellow box is still round, but the other ones are not. So the ones that we've associated class 2, or the one, has the property border radius, and the others do not have it now. So yeah, that's how you associate two classes to the same object.
And the CSS that is read by the file is that one because it's inside the folder called assets. So yes. The structure is always like this: a folder called assets and then a file called style.css.
It can be the name style does not matter. You can have multiple CSS files actually.
Okay, but they must be inside the folder called assets. That it's in the same folder than the Python file.
Yeah, and they need to have the .css extension.
Okay, all right.
And actually, you can also apply JavaScript code to this, but yeah, that's kind of too much. So yeah, you can also use JavaScript for your application with Dash.
Okay. It just knows where to look for the CSS file. Imagine that we had class 3 in a different CSS file. You would know that he needs to search for class 3 in a different CSS.
When he initiates the app, he tries to find the assets inside of the same directory of the app itself.
And if he doesn't find them, you will give us some kind of error.
No. It doesn't apply any CSS.
Okay.
Also, yeah. Also, you can use external CSSs in when building an app. So, in our example, we define an app here. So app equal to app.dash and name. So this is important because it's the name of the app and let's keep this global variable. But if you wanted to use an external or pre-made CSS, which is online, there are some examples that Plotly offers. There's a command called external style sheets, and you would put here the link of that external CSS. So it doesn't need to be on the assets folder, it can be online, because Plotly already offers some pre-made CSSs. And you can use those with yours. So yeah. So if you want to use other CSSs, you can use them. Yeah.
Can we use that in the project, or
Yeah, sure.
somehow it will no points?
No, because in the end, it's the same thing. You still need to go to those particular CSSs and know the name of the classes,
okay,
and still associate them. Actually,
okay.
Actually, if you go to Plotly CSS, it's kind of smart because you can actually change the core components themselves. Your colleague was asking previously, how would he change this to vertically, to be vertical? There are CSSs that actually change the color, the font, and of the dash core components themselves, which might be easier than going into this command that we went. Where is it? Label style and display equal to block. So Plotly Dash already offers some pre-made CSSs that might be interesting to look at if you want. So yeah. Any doubt with the CSS?
But that solution that you are saying, instead of changing the radio, I think it was called, instead of changing the radio, I don't know how to call it, but
the bullets, yeah.
Yes, but that's not what I mean. Instead of changing the options, let's say, we would change the div, or we would change the radio also.
No, because you need to assume. So the radio has an ID. I actually don't know what the predefined ID. If you want to see the ID of a particular component, for example, I'm using Mozilla, but you can right-click the component and inspect element, or inspecionar element in Portuguese. It will open the console. This is kind of messy, I know, but what you're hovering actually shows up on top. So this is the class of this dash core component is actually called class select control.
Okay.
And you could create a CSS, create this class put this class on your CSS and try to give it more options.
Okay.
But the issue here is this is already a complex component. It's not a box. This is actually a drop down. It does a lot of stuff. So changing these stylings sometimes might actually break the visualization of that core component. Okay. So searching for the Plotly pre-made CSS, dash pre-made CSS might be useful, because if you come here, we are selecting the interactive component. Here, there's all of these styling options that are already on that component. We have background color white, which is the white here. We have border radius. We have a lot of them, which already is predefined in the dash core components, which are already predefined.
If we went to do the external CSS, we would just associate a different CSS to this div container, because I see that they're all
that
containers.
could happen. Yeah, that could happen. So, and if you associate, if they actually enter in conflict, that might be bothersome. So
okay.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't need to be that complicated, because the dash core these components naturally are pleasant to the eye. So, but I understand that some things might be changed. For example, the background color or whatever. Actually, if you've noticed, there's one called one pre-made access folder. This is actually one of Plotly's CSSs that they offer. So, and as you can see, it has a lot of properties. So yeah, but you were asking something. Sorry.
Yes, I don't know. We have only seen, I think, from recalling the previous classes, that we only built one page, right?
Yes.
Is this the intended objective of our project, or are we supposed to build more than one page?
No, it's more than enough. A multi-page can be kind of tricky. It's not a big leap, but no, we don't want you to do a multi-page application.
Okay, so we just do one page and we can put all the graphs that we want, but it's just one page. Okay.
Yes. So actually the oh, sorry. Here it is. So actually the dash library is a good example. So as you've noticed, that box that we've used in the CSS is copied from here. So if you come here and actually look at the box that we've created here, it's the same. So that's the next step. So if you see something that you like, so a particular box or a particular property that you look online and, oh, it actually looks nice and I would apply it to my project. You can find its properties pretty easily by, for example, let's see a box that or something particular of a document. So coming here, these boxes are pretty similar to ours, but they are a bit different. Imagine that you wanted this type of styling for your application, or just to get some of its properties. You do the same thing. So right-click the object itself, inspect element, or inspection element if in Portuguese. Be sure that you've clicked the right place. For example, I did not click the right place. You can hover until you find what you want. So I just got it. And here, there are the properties that are being displayed. So we have border width, border style, border color, all of the properties that you might want to use to your work.
And then you would copy all that to the style.css?
Or the ones that you want. So some of them in the beginning, you might not know what they do in particular. So some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but some of them are, I don't know what. So for example, box shadow accepts 1, 2, 3 numbers, and then accepts a color, then a number again, then 3 numbers again, and then a color. So by default, no one really knows what these colors or numbers represent. So what you can do, you can change it here, which is kind of weird, but if you change it here, it changed here, but you copy what you need. And sometimes you need to change things a bit so you actually know the property that you want, because you might not want them all.
Okay, but you would copy that and create a new class in your style.css,
so
right? That would be the method.
Okay, yeah. For example, we like these boxes, so I've copied all of the properties.
Okay.
This is the pre-made. Let's use it for our boxes. This one, let's not use this one. I actually didn't copy them very well. Okay. So box shadow, they have the same structure, so separated by double dot, finish with a dot comma. Should be okay. Let's see how it outputs. Yeah. So here it is. So this box, this container, and all of these containers are now have the same structure as the ones that we copied from. So I'm actually okay as these ones. If you note, this is exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward. If you find something that you like, inspect it with your browser. I believe most Chrome has it as well. I don't know if all browsers have this option, but I believe they do. And simply copy the properties that you like. Because building properties, for building an object and all of its properties from the very beginning might be kind of troublesome. So it's better to see examples and pick what you like. Although for an application, it wouldn't be required much more than this, right? We have our boxes to separate our elements. Seems a pretty legitimate choice. We might want to change our background color or our color template in terms of in terms of the application itself. We might want to use a darker color or whatever. And we would also want to have the layout of the plotly figures to match the layout of our application. So remember, you can also change the background of a plotly figure, etc. So any questions about the CSS stylings, etc.? So right now, you can actually do plotly figures, you can do callbacks, and you can also structure your page and give it a basic layout. So obviously we're not expecting a big page, but we can already make a pretty a pretty good looking page, sorry. So in terms of the possibility of doing a project, we could already do it with what we've seen, right?
Hope so.
No, I'm
Let's
asking.
see.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I say yes.
No, I'm asking
for
this.
The project.
I'm asking this. I really want you to learn and to produce a good project. So, and this is a question. So, is there any other point that you might find interesting to explore? So, next class, besides project, besides talking more about the project itself, we will try to go through other and more complex Dash core components that you might want to use. But in terms of the basic components, and they are very usable, went through them. I'm asking, do you have any particular requests that you might need for your application that we haven't seen yet?
Professor, I have a question regarding the slicers. For example, normally use arrays, but can we use arrays? You give the values in the vector, but can we use like a column of our data set?
Yes, data set, data frame. No, you can.
Yes.
It needs to be a pandas data series, I believe.
Okay. So we need to transform the column in the series.
Yes, and if that doesn't work, I believe it works. A pandas column is a pandas series, so it is not a data frame. But if that doesn't work, and I believe it does, you can always put dot values on the end and transform it into a Python array. So it's better if I show you, right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so imagine that for the the example one is easier. So you have this array. You instead of having this array, you have a pandas column. What you want is, for example, you did column equal to df dot whatever. What you can do is do dot values here, and this transforms a pandas series into a numpy array, which is for sure accepted, but it needs to be an array.
Okay.
I believe I had already answered your email, right?
Yes, but I didn't try, so I asked again.
Okay. So actually, okay.
I have one question.
Sure.
So Now we are looking at these, let me say, filters applying to one graph. So how complex is to have it interacting with, I don't know, 3 or 4 graphs in the same page? Is it too much complicated, or is the same method applied to the different graphs?
It's the same method. So this class6.app, which is the other Python file that you have, actually has that. So we can simply run it. We'll go through the code later. So the objective was that after I would show you how to do this, you would actually structure. Oh, I actually rerun the same application. Okay. So the objective was after I've showed you this, you'd all try to do it the same thing, but for this app, so which has a lot more stuff. So, and this app actually, we can go to the comments, actually has this structure. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 interactive components, which are connected by 2 callbacks. And actually the callbacks, one of them has 4 outputs, 3 outputs, and the other has 5. So this is what you were asking, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Good. So it is pretty straightforward. So this is the structure of the application. I did the same thing where I've put into single variables the interactive components so we could see this in a clearer way, although there's a lot. This is the callback that actually, given the 7 inputs, outputs 3 graphs or 3 plotly figures. It's still one function. And actually, I believe I tried to partition this as best I could. So the first is a bar, the second is a choropleth, the third is another graph. You define the figures as you may, so it doesn't need to have a particular structure, just so you can walk around them. And in the end, you output 3 objects. So it is the same thing. You simply, instead of outputting one thing, you output 3 or how many you want.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. You simply put everything inside of one function and output more things. So, and they are separated.
This is the graph, right?
This is, sorry?
Okay.
The output is the figure.
Yes.
Okay.
They are 3 figures, so they are separated only by a comma. So it's figure 1, comma, figure 2, comma, figure 3. This is simply so it's more visually appealing, but it's a comma.
Where are you? Where is the connection between the parameter we are changing and the figure? Where is that connection? So because I'm, for instance, clicking on a radio button, and how does the figure knows that it has to follow that option that I selected in the radio button?
So you're in the first application or the second? It's the same thing. Okay, let's go.
It's the same, yeah.
Yeah, let's go to the first one, which has less things. So now we can see on the code. So when you define an interactive component, the radio button, which is, here it is, you give it an ID. And this is a dynamic element, which means you can change it. And whenever you change it, the callback actually notices, okay, this guy changed the radio gas component. So he triggers the function associated to it and immediately outputs that to the connected component, which is the dcc.graph, which is an empty plotly figure. Did I explain? Did you understand?
But, for instance, we could have the same figure and have 2 radio buttons, and according to the option that we choose, the figure is the same, but something inside it changes. So it's like a property of the figure, or am I mistaken? I'm not sure if I'm being clear on my doubt.
It's so the figure, it's a new figure, but we are only changing a small thing about it. So, and since this is fast, it doesn't. It seems like we've only changed a small thing, but it's actually.
But you are outputting a new figure.
Yes.
Connected to that new property of the radio button.
Yes. It
So
erases.
it's not possible like to change the property of the figure to be according to the option that doesn't exist.
Not really. It's kind of a
Okay.
delete, create a new one, which is
okay. All right. Okay.
So yeah.
Also have one question. So can you go to the application? Just to check one thing. If we, for example, select the year.
What the previous? Okay, sorry.
The other one. Sorry. Just to check if we select, for example, an year, if it will influence the other graphs as well.
It only changes the choropleth and the boxes, the text. So okay. So the year is not. It's a single choice, and it only changes these 5 boxes and the choropleth.
Okay, but imagine that you select the data from 2005.
I think. Okay.
In the graph, no, in the graph, in the image.
Oh, here.
Yeah, in the dash. If it influences just a question, huh?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. What is selecting here? Like click.
Yeah, click, yeah, by clicking.
Oh, it
there.
doesn't change anything.
Okay.
It could actually change something, but that's kind of more advanced. But you could do it.
Okay,
So,
but
actually,
with this, it's not changing.
So now this is a Plotly figure without a legend. So legend, yeah, without. If you had a legend, it would change if you clicked on the legend. This is still a Plotly figure, but there's actually an option when you click here, it changes something. But that's kind of more advanced, but it's also a possibility because this is an event when you click this, and you can actually say, okay, when I click this, this will output the data of where it was clicked to a different callback. So in reality, this graph could be an input to a callback. Yeah. But it's more advanced.
That was the, yes.
It's possible. So actually, one of the examples I gave, it actually does that. I don't want to confuse you, but so sent. I'm just, where was the?
Is the Spotify one?
Yes, the Spotify one, exactly. So
yeah.
That one actually, when you click on the map, the map serves as an input to a callback that changes something else. It would be equivalent for me to click here, and it would output the country to a callback that would change something and appear somewhere else.
That was the ask.
Yeah, it's possible.
That's right there.
And it's in that code, so.
Okay.
So, but okay, we still have some time, like half an hour. Do you have any more doubts? Sorry.
Nothing from my side for now.
Okay, what I wanted to do now is I would want to ask you to, given more complex dashboard, if you could actually structure the layout. So what I would want you to try to do is not the hardcore styling stuff, but the structure. So could you actually achieve this structure, which I'm going to give you? It's loading now. Okay. So could you, given this application, which has more or less the same things. The only difference is that this has a tab and a button, but it's the same thing in terms of structure. Could you achieve this? So I would like you to try to do it. So
okay, so we have to play around with the divs and add some CSS, right?
yeah, the only thing you don't really need to add any particular. The only CSS you need to add is either display to be horizontal and the size, so width, because the boxes are exactly the same thing. So the only thing you need to do is define the divs, the correct divs, and where to put horizontal or vertical, and the size of the boxes themselves.
Okay.
So if we start a bit, I'll give you some time to try to do it. If we start like with the drawing, we have, this is not required because it's an H1, it's a div by itself. We have a big div which actually stacks objects horizontally. We have another one here with all of the interactive components. Okay, and this is particularly obvious, right? So, but I'll give you some time to try and do it. So the only thing you need to do is html.div and put whatever items you want. And in the meanwhile, I will leave you with the example displayed. So let me just take these drawings. So I'll leave you with the code from the previous example. So if you have any doubts,
we should run now the class 6 app, right?
yes, class 6.
That's what we're changing.
Yeah. So you can right click and run class 6 app. So I believe that I'm sorry, I will leave it back, but the items are in order, and I believe the names are pretty straightforward. So all of the interactive components are here. So these ones will all be in the container. The only issue is that if you've noticed, you're going to end up, this container will be inside of this container, which will be inside of this container, which will be inside of this container. So you'll have like 5 containers deep, but yeah, that's the exercise. I'll leave it as it was. So, but after this exercise, no, but after this, you are actually able to structure your app however you want in terms of position. You could actually think of it as a table, so to speak, where you try to fill with a given position the items that you want. So, in a given position.
We are supposed to rearrange the whole page, right?
The sorry?
The all the wall, so that the page has a lot of graphs, and we're supposed to arrange everything.
Sorry.
Or
Yeah,
not.
you're supposed to achieve this. I'm sorry. If you weren't seeing this, it would be kind of hard. Yes, you actually don't need to change the position. You just need to put them in containers. So yeah. So given this, achieve this.
Okay.
The only difference here is that this has a tab, but the components are the same. Just ignore the tab.
Okay.
Because it has a box with all of the components here and without the button. So given that no one asked me to put in the meantime the structure that you're supposed to achieve, I don't know. So, but if in the meanwhile, if anyone has any other doubts, you can also ask me. So don't worry, I'll share in the end of the class the code, but still, I would like you to at least try, because you most likely will have to do it in your project. Most likely, yeah. So remember, when actually working with the styling properties, you can do them with two different ways. You can immediately and specifically apply properties to a particular HTML component. We actually only applied properties to the HTML.div, but you could apply them in the same fashion or manner to any other HTML or core component, or HTML components, sorry. So you would simply put comma, style equal to dictionary and the properties that you want. You can also do the same thing and in a more generalized way with a CSS, which is a file inside of a folder assets, which is in the same directory as your application. It needs to have the .css terminology. Okay. Which is a collection of classes or items associated with given properties. And you can associate properties, a set of properties, to either an item, for example, the body, which is the main container, or one of the many HTML containers you might use, h1, etc., or to a class, which you can share to whichever whichever component you want by saying class name equals to the name of that class. The difference between them is that classes start with a dot when you define them. So yeah, that's what you have to keep in mind. Also, the most useful property that you might find is display equals to flex. That sets the display of items inside from vertical to horizontal inside of that particular HTML object. Yeah. So assuming that you're still trying, so I believe that we start big, then go small, right? We have a big container. This is the most complex container, which will have two smaller containers. Let's put this here. These containers will have to be displayed horizontally, so we already know one property to change. This one will only get the core components, so we won't change this anymore. This one is a bit different, which has two now vertically stacked. Let's change the color like this. The one below will have the graph naturally. And this one actually will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which will be displayed horizontally. This is an HTML label, by the way, which is simply a text input. Oh, and actually this is also one of the possibilities of a callback. So as until now you've only seen callbacks that go to plotly figures, but a callback can be whatever you want. It can be a text string, which is the case here. So the only difference in this particular callback, I will put this back later, is so the callback is here. And remember that the output normally was a figure, and now it's a children. Why? Because this guess is an HTML label, and the inside of every HTML object are its children. So as in for the HTML.div, it has the children properties, which are the inputs of that particular container. The HTML.label also has children, which is the input. So it's no longer a figure here. It goes to the children of that HTML element as a string. Oh. Yeah. So here, the big one that encloses them all needs to have a style equal to display equals style display flex. These two should have a width like 20, 80% or 30, 70, something like that. These ones should have, I don't know, 20, 80 again. This red one should have 20% height, not width this time, and display equal to flex because this is horizontal. And these ones, let's say width equal to 20% so that they actually stretch to the whole document, to the whole container. Did anyone manage to do this until now? So
the boxes with the emissions,
yeah.
Those are 5 divs.
Those are okay. I can keep this for now. Those are these. They are HTML labels. They can be but 5 divs.
We have that's we have to create 5 divs.
Yeah. So actually, since this is a insert. Okay, since this is an HTML object, I believe it can also accept style. Yeah, it can also accept style and class ID. So you don't actually need to create a new div for this. Until now, we've applied styling to divs, but it can actually be applied to any HTML item.
So we just put style flex in each label?
No, the flex is for the one that encloses it.
But so right now I have these labels. They are aligned vertically, and I want to put them in line. I don't.
So you actually need to have. Oh, sorry, I stopped sharing. So you actually need to have one div that has all of them inside, and that div has a style equal to flex. So
okay.
So this is the div that has a style equal to flex. So if you think about, let's say flex is green and red is normal. So this has to be flex. This has to be flex.
We are on JetBrains, Professor.
Sorry? Oh, okay.
We are seeing JetBrains.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Perfect. So, where? Okay. So this has to be flex and this has to be flex. So these are the only ones that need to be flex. Yeah. Because the other ones, which are these and these, are simply, you only need to change their size, right? And so also, even if you don't really use the examples from the last semester's projects, you can always copy their boxes or their CSS styling if you like them. So that's might also be useful, even though you might not use some of their things. Maybe the styling is useful. So is there any other functionality or particularity that you might want to, that you haven't yet seen here, but you might want to use in your project while we're doing this?
Not for now.
Yeah. It's related with the project, not with functionality itself. So the way we collect the data.
Oh, okay.
But we have a meeting tomorrow. We can discuss that.
Okay. So that's a good, okay, we can discuss it more specifically tomorrow, but the data, you can collect it however. You can do it as we've done in classes, where you get from somewhere a pre-made data set. Callbacks require some data managing or some data modeling, at least, not much, but a bit. But the data can come in any shape or format that you want. If you want to change it in Excel and have a lot of small Excel files that you use for your project, that's okay. The things that matter are dash, plotly, and callbacks. So.
Okay, that's a good idea, because we need to do two different pivot tables in Python, then multiply them and make some changes to get the data that we want. So maybe put it in an Excel file and upload it will be a better.
If you prefer that, yeah. So if you're more comfortable, yeah. So data manipulation is not evaluated naturally. We've tried to always to do as little as possible because it makes no sense for this lecture. So you can get it from wherever. The only manipulation you have is for the interaction, but that's unavoidable. Okay, I can. So for the overachievers out there, or some people that might find that there are not enough Dash core components or components in a general or more broader way, there's actually another library called Dash Bootstrap. Let me just remove the annotations. It's actually called Dash Bootstrap. I believe it's something like Bootstrap components, which is an extension of Dash, and it offers more components, more and different. So if you're interested in different components, you can also come here. It has different buttons, has these nav bars, has different drop-downs. Well, it has more components, so keep that in mind if you want. So also for those of you that I've sent a lot of emails lately, but if you didn't receive, I've sent an email for all of you for the class substitution, which has been officially scheduled on Saturday. But if you want to have like an hour or two, some of your groups, so we can discuss the project in particular with your group, please go to that Excel file that I've shared to you on email and put your schedule, please. So we already have 4 groups that scheduled an appointment, but if you have doubts or you want, please put it there, okay? So we're right about on time. Do you have any more doubts?
No, not for now. Thanks for the class.
Okay, so yeah, if that's the case.
Bye.
Yeah, so thank you all. Again, sorry for the last week, but it was an improvised. Okay, improvised, but we'll do it Saturday. I hope you all can come, at least. I know it's bothersome Saturday in the morning, but it is what it is. And again, if you have any doubts, please send me an email. We really want you to finish the project and have a good project, so please.
Teacher, the class is the 9 a.m., right?
Yeah, it's at 9 a.m.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Next Tuesday is the test.
Sorry?
The test is next Tuesday.
I actually don't know.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Oh, I've sent you an email. The delivery date passed from the 10th to the 15th of June also, so you have 5 more days to do your project.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 So I'll stop the recording as well. Okay. Oh no.